The Space Force says it will set up the Space Systems Command sometime in 2021. It won't incorporate the Space Development Agency into that command until late 2022. Todd Harrison is director of the Aerospace Security Project, the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Todd, it's good to see you. What's your sense of how acquisition is standing up inside the Space Force?
Well, it's slow but steady, because the Space Force, as we've discussed before, it's not, as if you're creating a brand new service out of nothing. You're really reorganizing a bunch of existing organizations that already existed. And so, that's what is going on here in trying to stand up the Space Systems Command is they're transferring over acquisition organizations that already exist. And so, it's kind of like trying to upgrade a car while it's in motion. And so that's what they're doing, slowly but steady. And we're seeing little bits and pieces roll out over time. But I think it's important to get it right the first time, because once you move these organizations, once you create a new bureaucratic structure, it's going to be very difficult to go back and change that in the future.
Yeah, I'm detecting some impatience in the community for the Space Force getting this done, but I think back to the Department of Homeland Security. That's been 17, 18 years, and it's still not completely settled. And I wonder if we're just being way too impatient when it comes to the Space Force.
Well, I think there is a lot of impatience. If you think back to why we got a Space Force to begin with, one of the main reasons is a perceived lack of speed and lack of innovation in space acquisitions. And that's one of the things that policymakers wanted to improve by reorganizing to put all of these different space acquisition organizations under one unified chain of command. So there is a bit of impatience, especially on the Hill and in industry, to see that happen so that they can start moving out and move out in a new direction. But that is a slow and delicate process, and it is upsetting, a lot of different bureaucracies and bureaucratic interest within the building.
Reform is probably not the right word for this. Restructuring or reshaping is probably more accurate. Is there something that we can learn from the restructuring and reshaping inside OSD over the last 5 or 6, 10 years that might help us understand what could come or what should come inside the Space Force, Todd?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that we've learned through many different types of restructuring within government, specifically within the military, is that adding more process, adding more layers of bureaucracy is not going to help you. And I think that the Space Force is very cognizant of that, and they have been trying to remove levels of bureaucracy, rather than adding more and more on top of what already exists. But it is one of those things where you've got to recognize that you get really one shot at this. You get one bite at the apple. If you don't get it right the first time, you're going to be stuck with the consequences for probably a generation.
What's the implication of that concept then for the way that people should go about thinking of the structuring of the Space Force, given the prospect that we might have a transition of administrations and therefore a transition of civilian leadership within the next 3 to 6 months?
Well, if there is a change in administration, then the one thing we can be sure of is major decisions, major restructuring decisions are going to be put on hold, because the new team coming in is going to want to review those decisions. So if a decision hasn't been made by now, even if it is made in the next few weeks or months, the new team coming in is going to want to take another look at that and consider how do they want to structure this going forward. I think one of the big issues that the next presidential term, whether it's a Biden administration or a Trump administration, one of the big issues they're going to have to deal with in space acquisitions is, the fact that we've got 2 different parallel tracks going on right now. We've got one track of acquisitions where we're buying the next generation, of existing systems, incremental improvements on what we already have. And then we've got another track of acquisitions going on, really led by the Space Development Agency, where they're trying to buy brand new types of systems, brand new types of capabilities that we don't currently have. And so, can those efforts continue in parallel? They sure can. It's just going to cost more money. If you're not willing to put the additional resources towards it, then you're going to have to make a choice at some point. Do we transition over from legacy architectures in space, legacy systems to the new systems, or do we continue just building incremental improvements into the things we already have?
We just have a couple of minutes left, Todd, but is it a little troubling about the fact that we're talking already about transitioning potentially from legacy systems to new innovative systems, and the Space Force isn't really even fully stood up yet?
Well, that's part of the impatience here, is that it's not just policymakers that are impatient. We see our adversaries and the threats to our space systems continuing to improve. And so there is that pressure from the threats that we see going on. And then there's the pressure from commercial industry, quite frankly, that there are a lot of new commercial space capabilities coming online that could be very useful to the military, that could enable brand new military missions in space, things that we don't do in space today. And there is some impatience in parts of the military to try to take advantage of these systems.
Todd Harrison, thanks very much. Great to have you.
Thank you. Good to be back.